Hello everyone, this is Many Ninja speaking. For this video, we're actually going to be doing a 4-figure review overall, all being based off the Jakks specific Sonic the Hedgehog toy line, but we're going to be starting off with one of the newer items that came out, which is basically them doubling down on the assorted 2-packs that have been popping up on Amazon and a few other spots. As you can kind of see, this particular 2-pack is going to be the Sonic and Cream figure 2-pack, which is a weird combination of a new and old stock, as the Sonic figure itself comes from, I believe, a 2020 wave, while Cream is a much newer release, I believe 2023. And as we get the thing out of its flimsy packaging, because their 2-pack packaging is special, as you can see, you can tell there is an absolute lack of care on one half of how they package it up. Sonic has seen better days. Well, Cream is nicely put in there with a nice little mini clamshell, for lack of a better term. Now, once we get the things fully out of their plastic prison there, you can kind of see they do have also a varying degree of quality in terms of how the figures themselves have been handled. Things have definitely been changing in terms of their quality control over the past couple of years, and it stands out pretty obviously once we take a look here. Now, as a brief reminder, this overall toy line is a 4-inch figure line, with Sonic standing about the proper 4 inches, while 3 is a smidgen above 3 inches if you go from the top of her ears. And of course, each figure comes with one accessory each. Looking at the bit of the older stock here, there is definitely a difference in terms of the overall finish. This is definitely a less polished piece, per se. Technically, most of the paint on here, the paint apps are actually pretty decent, although the blue on Sonic's fur, whatever, skin pattern, whatever you want to call that one, is a tad oddly glossy in a lot of the parts of there. Kind of could use a little bit of a more matte finish, but that's just not how they were released back during that particular time period. And in terms of the joints, it is about standard fare, about 15 points of articulation overall, of a varying degree, and you can kind of see the joints right out of the box, quite literally, are looking a little beat up, which unfortunately is about standard fare for this particular toy line. It's not exactly a deluxe line. The joints will feel a bit either combination of loose or too stiff, or in the case of knee joints, particularly bendy when you actually try to move them around here. And overall, it's not a great feeling figure, I'm not gonna lie. For the price point, I believe USD, you're looking at these, normally would be something like basically $10 each, so of course you're not exactly paying premium price, but still, it wouldn't have... I swear, $10 used to stretch a lot further than they used to. And actually, I should take my previous statement about the paint apps being okay back, because the shoes, the line work on the shoes, they aren't exactly crisp. At least the facial details and the eyes themselves are pretty okay. Those are passable. Now, in terms of how this figure balance, as you can kind of guess from the quality of the joints there, it does not balance particularly well, which is probably why you need the snowboard here, which you can see it's very clean in terms of how they've applied the decals on this one, although the actual quality of the way they cast it, yeah, there's some defects on the snowboard as well. Not sure if that was an issue from how it was shipped, or if it's just kind of a classic issue from the line, since I don't have an original 2020 version of this to compare to. Now, yeah, even with that, it doesn't balance particularly well, but at least it tends to work a little bit better. Now, as we take a look at the second figure of this particular 2-pack, you can kind of see the much newer release, Cream the Bunny here, or Cream the Rabbit, is a much more polished looking figure by comparison. And that's honestly due to a lot of different production changes that have occurred over the year. You're obviously dealing with mostly the same colored plastic, so it's appropriate colors for the parts, so a lot less paint being put down there overall. It is also feeling, honestly, a little more of a solid grade of plastic as well. It's just the figure feels a little more sturdy, but mind you, the fact that the figure is also a much smaller size is probably helping on that. It tends to balance much better, obviously, for that same reason too. In terms of articulation, it is about the same as a standard figure, plus a bit of tail articulation I would amusingly point out in a second. But what I will say is, in terms of the range of motion for the legs, it's pretty much non-existent. And that's because the skirt itself is a hard plastic skirt, much like most of the rest of the material, so it has no give whatsoever. That being said, at least it's a nice solid enough release on there. Everything seems to articulate for where it can move pretty well in there. I don't have too many complaints, except for maybe the accessory, which has an ice cream cone there. has very little association with the character. You'd really have expected at least a makeshift Chow to go with the character, but at least on the bright side, it turns out that same hand can hold a wide variety of goods, so if you have some random accessories from your other toys, well, you have some options of what you can do there that make it a little more interesting. Now, quick scale comparison with what we looked at so far, both the newer and older stuff. As you can see, Sonic, being an older figure, is also slightly smaller in scale. Or I really should say the newer figures like Amy and Cream here are on a bit of a different scale compared to all of the older releases. They're actually a tad larger if anything. So that does stand out a bit if you have older figures from back in time. It isn't a perfect match. Now, the third figure for this particular video is actually going to be an interesting omission until more recent times, being Rouge the Bat. Obviously originally from the Sonic Adventure games, and a bunch of stuff since then. And the reason I say it's an omission for the most part is because aside from the original Resource Sonic Adventure 2 toy line, I don't think she had anything since then until this particular release came out, and which itself was very short printed at the original time of theirs, meaning you couldn't find this stuff in the shops very easily. Quick overview on this particular figure, which by the way is about 4 inches tall, a little more if you go by the tip of the ears, and while it stands up pretty well on there, this would be a little more of a dramatic example of when things don't exactly go well in terms of the decals being able to stay on there and having some paint issues. As we take a little more look on the face, you can see there's definitely some paint chipping and stuff going around the eyelashes in particular, and also in mine, one of the ears got dented straight out of the package just because of the way it was stored on there. There's a little warping that's going on there. So yeah, this one seems to have been a little more prone to defects. Now, in terms of the accessory, at least I will say the bomb here, I believe it's the heart bomb is the proper name for it, or at least what they have in the packaging here, is at least related to the character, so it's a much nicer than what we had with Cream. Now, in terms of the articulation check, I will politely say that this one seems to have had a few issues. Now, either it's a case where, like the previous stuff, where they didn't insert the joints properly, but yeah, they're kind of bending kind of which way, assuming if they're moving at all. Some joints are noticeably stiff, while the other ones are definitely a lot more loosey-goosey. The wrist joints themselves are pretty much fine. The elbows aren't great, and the shoulders weren't exactly too functional, I'd say. But what I would have to say is the biggest offender on this particular toy are the hips and legs, which I just have to simply assume were inserted in the wrong way, because that's not how knees bend at all. And the hips themselves are barely functional. I believe even after camera on this particular footage, I tried dipping this thing in hot water for a while to see excuse me, if I could get this thing to move around a little better. And while it has a little more motion before, it's hardly the range of articulation you would kind of expect for how this particular toy has been cut. So yeah, it's not exactly the most mobile figure, I will say. Well, between then and now that I look at the face, you can see that the facial features are noticeably separated from the rest of it because of the gap there. Yeah, unfortunately, this particular figure could have used a little more work on there. Now, moving on to the last figure we're going to be covering for this particular video in here. This is going to be one of the newer versions of Knuckles the Echidna here, packed with a star spring, as you can kind of see in there. And as you can see, he came in the same wave as yet another Sonic, Chaos, as well as Big the Cat. So this is definitely a little bit of a newer figure, and thus kind of shares with a few characteristics, being kind of slightly different scale than all the older stuff, as well as in terms of general presentation. It's a pretty much of a cleaner one, just because most of the stuff is made out of the same red plastic that he himself is mostly covered in, so you're kind of hard to go wrong with in terms of his paint apps. There's little to none to speak of. That being said, I will still say there are a few quirks on this particular toy. Namely, in terms of his articulation, it is, just by the nature of the sculpt, a little more limited. The neck has no articulation whatsoever. You can't turn his head at all, because of I'm going to call them braids for lack of a better one, and as you can see, the elbows are absolutely locked into their kind of given bent position on there. It's good if you want to do a bushwhacker impersonation, for those that remember the old-fashioned wrestler, but not great for anything else there. Now, the knees and hips are okay. I won't say they're great, but at least for this line, they're considerably quite functional, have good range, not exactly the most stiff hips though. And the shoes themselves are functional, and most importantly, the figure can balance on his own without any issues. Now, in terms of the accessory with the spring, it clicks. There's not much more to it. It's not character specific at all. It's actually pretty useless, if anything. And as we wrap up this particular video with a few more group shots, just so you can see everything in scale, I just want to extend an extra special thanks to VR Hayamaru, my artist friend, who not only did me the favor of finding quite a few of the toys featured in this particular bit, but also for sending me some extra photos of our highly weaponized rabbit there, just for some extra flavor text on that. So, once again, thanks for all the rest of you for watching, and we'll touch base later on with a few more of my more usual things. For now, take care though.